It was a Tuesday afternoon, one of those days that felt stuck in neutral, where time itself seemed to be dragging its feet. I was lounging on my sofa, aimlessly scrolling on my phone, when a frantic call from Caleb buzzed through. He was in the middle of a class and couldn't leave, but his voice was tight with worry. His mom's dog, a golden retriever named Winston, had gotten out of the yard, and she was beside herself. He asked if I could possibly go over and help look. It wasn't a big ask for me. I grabbed my keys from the hook by the door and sent him a quick text letting him know I was on my way. Caleb's place wasn't far, just a short drive across Evanston. It was a simple trip. I knew his mother, Sarah, was usually home, but she was always a quiet presence, often reading in the living room or simply keeping to herself. I'd never given her much thought, beyond acknowledging that she was strikingly beautiful for her age. She had to be in her mid-40s, but she carried herself with a grace that defied time. To me, she had always been just Caleb's mom. That was the extent of it. Nothing more complicated. So when I pulled up and knocked on the door, I expected to find her composed but concerned. Instead, the door flew open, and she was standing there, her face streaked with tears and her eyes wide with panic. She was wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, but she looked completely undone. The air around her was thick with an anxiety you could almost taste. "Elias," she breathed, her voice cracking. "Caleb called you?" I nodded, my own sense of calm wavering in the face of her distress. "He said Winston was missing. I came to help." She ran a hand through her hair, a gesture of pure frustration. "I don't know how it happened. I just turned my back for a second and the gate was open. He's never run off before." I tried to offer a reassuring smile. "We'll find him. Dogs usually don't go too far. Which way do you think he went?" She pointed vaguely down the street, her shoulders slumping. "I've already walked up and down the block a dozen times, calling his name." I could see the exhaustion in her posture. "Why don't you stay here in case he comes back?" I suggested gently. "I'll take a drive around the neighborhood, check the park." She looked at me, her gaze filled with a desperate sort of gratitude that made my stomach flutter. "Would you?" "Oh, Elias, thank you." For the next hour, I drove slowly through the quiet suburban streets, my window down, calling Winston's name. I felt a knot of sympathy tightening in my chest for Sarah. I'd only ever seen her as the calm, collected mother figure. Witnessing her so vulnerable was jarring. It made her seem more human, more real. Just as I was about to circle back to her house, I spotted a flash of gold near the entrance to a small wooded area a few blocks away. I pulled over and got out, and sure enough, there was Winston, his leash tangled, around a bush, looking more confused than scared. He wagged his tail as I approached and untangled him. The relief that washed over me was immediate and surprisingly potent. When I walked back up her driveway with Winston trotting happily beside me, Sarah burst out of the front door. The cry of relief she let out was raw and unfiltered. She dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around the dog, burying her face in his fur. I stood back, giving her a moment, feeling like an intruder on a deeply private reunion. After a few seconds, she looked up at me, her eyes still shimmering with tears, but this time they were tears of joy. She stood up and, without a second thought, threw her arms around me. "You're a lifesaver," she whispered into my shoulder, her voice thick with emotion. "I can't thank you enough. I owe you anything you want." The hug was tight and desperate, and it lasted a moment longer than a simple thank you embrace. I didn't know where to put my hands, so I just let them rest awkwardly on her back. When she finally pulled away, she didn't seem embarrassed at all. "Please," she said, wiping her eyes. "Come in. Let me get you something to drink. It's the least I can do." I hesitated, not sure if I should intrude further, but I followed her inside anyway. She wasn't a stranger, of course, but something felt different now. I had only ever viewed her as a poised, maternal figure. I never imagined feeling this strange pull toward her. We sat in the living room, and she brought me a glass of water. At first, our conversation was light, centered around the dog and how relieved she was. But as we talked, I noticed her opening up in a way she never had before. She spoke about her life, about how things were shifting as Caleb grew more independent, and how, despite being surrounded by people, she often felt profoundly alone. For a little while, it didn't feel like I was talking to my best friend's mother. It was just her and me, sharing a moment of genuine, unvarnished connection. And the way she was looking at me, with an intensity that seemed to search for something in my eyes, suggested she was truly interested in what I had to say. That was when something inside me shifted. I began to see her in a new light. There was so much more to her than just being Caleb's mum. She offered a small, enigmatic smile. "Elias, you've grown into such a good man," she said softly. "It's hard to believe. I remember when you and Caleb were just kids, tearing around this house." I didn't know how to respond, so I just gave a slight nod. A new kind of energy was crackling between us, something unspoken but undeniably there. I could feel it, a subtle spark, a quiet tension, and I was unsure what it all meant. But I knew I wasn't ready to leave just yet. She got up and went into the kitchen to put on a kettle for tea, and I found myself following her. As she passed me, I caught the faint, clean scent of her perfume. And for a brief instant, she didn't feel like Caleb's mother at all. She was just a woman, an individual with her own story, her own needs. "Thank you again for coming over," she said, turning back to face me. "I really needed someone to talk to today." I managed a small smile, a warmth spreading through my chest. "Anytime," I said, and I meant it. As I left a few minutes later, I couldn't shake the feeling that a fundamental change had occurred between us. Something unsaid had taken root, and I had no idea where it might lead. The next time I saw Sarah, it was completely by chance. I was at the grocery store picking up a few things for dinner when we nearly collided in the pasta aisle. She was holding a jar of pesto, studying the label with a delicate frown creasing her brow. For some reason, that simple image struck me. How had I never noticed how naturally beautiful she was? It wasn't just her physical appearance. It was the way she moved, the quiet confidence she radiated. It was as if she possessed some knowledge that the rest of the world was not privy to. I hadn't expected to see her, and frankly, I was uncertain how to act. We hadn't spoken since that strange, emotionally charged afternoon with the dog. But something about that day had resonated with me. Something about her gratitude and the way her gaze had held mine lingered in my thoughts. I had tried to dismiss it as a one-off, an unusual event, until she looked up from the jar and her eyes met mine. "Elias," she said, a calm, inviting smile spreading across her face. Her voice had a quality that immediately put you at ease. I smiled back, trying my best to keep my demeanor casual. "Hello, Sarah. I didn't expect to run into you here." She gestured to her nearly full cart. "Just grabbing a few things for the week," she replied. "What about you?" It was a simple question, but it blossomed into a full conversation right there in the middle of the aisle. We talked about recipes, the unseasonably warm weather, and other trivial topics. But beneath the surface of our light-hearted chat, there was a thrum of something deeper. A subtle but palpable tension hung in the air between us. It was in the small glances, the quiet smiles, and then, out of nowhere, she asked, "Are you busy tonight?" She said it so casually, as if the answer didn't matter much, but I could tell she was gently testing the waters. I wasn't sure how to respond. I shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "Not really, just planning on a quiet night at home." She smiled faintly. Caleb is out with his friends this evening. I was thinking of making some lasagna. You should come over. It would be nice to have some company. The offer caught me completely by surprise. My immediate instinct was to politely decline. After all, besides Caleb, what did we really have to talk about? But the way she asked, her voice soft and hopeful, made it difficult to say no. Before I could overthink it, I heard myself agreeing. Yeah, sure, I'd like that. And that was it. I had no idea what I was walking into. Later that evening, as I drove over to her house, a nervous energy buzzed in my chest. I felt an inexplicable tightness, as if I were about to step into a territory I wasn't prepared for. When I arrived, her home felt as warm and familiar as always. The rich aroma of garlic and herbs filled the air, wrapping the space in a comforting warmth that felt almost too inviting. Sarah was in the kitchen, humming softly to herself as she stirred a sauce on the stove. I stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching her. And that's when it hit me. The woman before me didn't feel like the Sarah I had known for years. She looked the same, but there was an openness about her, a vulnerability that felt more authentic. "Come on in, make yourself comfortable," she said over her shoulder. "Dinner's almost ready." I took a seat at the kitchen island, trying not to look as anxious as I felt. She moved around the kitchen with an effortless grace, as if she belonged there in every sense of the word. Meanwhile, I sat there, trying to decipher the storm of feelings brewing inside me. It wasn't just about how she looked or how at ease she seemed. It was about how she made me feel, as if I were more than just her son's friend. We ate, and the conversation flowed easily. There were no awkward pauses or forced small talk. We spoke about life and its tendency to rarely go according to plan. She talked about her younger days, how she missed the thrill of spontaneity, the feeling of being excited about the unknown. She confessed that with Caleb gone so often, her life had settled into a predictable routine. There was a raw edge to her voice when she said it. It felt as if she had been holding back these feelings for years, pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I just listened. I didn't offer any profound advice or deep insights. I simply nodded and gave her the space to speak. Even as I sat there in silence, I was noticing things. The way her eyes would light up when she spoke passionately about something. The genuine, uninhibited sound of her laughter. She wasn't just Caleb's mother anymore. She was a woman with her own thoughts, her own feelings, her own life. "Thank you for a great dinner," I said as we finished eating, and I started to help clear the plates. She smiled at me, and for a fleeting second I saw something deeper in her gaze. "I'm so glad you came," she said. "It's been a long time since I've had a real conversation with someone." I didn't know what to say, so I just gave a slight nod, but I knew we were both thinking the same thing. A shift had occurred between us, one that we didn't need to acknowledge out loud. When it was time for me to leave, she gave me a hug at the door. It was simple, relaxed, and warm. But her hand lingered on my back for a fraction of a second too long, and that small moment stayed with me. "Take care, Elias," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. My head was spinning as I walked to my car. The evening had seemed so ordinary on the surface, yet it had dislodged something inside me. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. She hadn't done anything overtly inappropriate, but the way she looked at me, the way she listened, it made me feel like there was something real forming between us, a connection of a different kind. I had been to Caleb's house hundreds of times, but this visit was not the same, and I hated how much I found myself thinking about it in the days that followed. I tried to push it out of my mind, to pretend that nothing had happened. A few days later, Caleb called and asked if I wanted to grab a drink. I thought getting out might help clear my head, but as soon as I walked into the pub, I saw Sarah sitting at a high-top table with a couple of her friends. She saw me, and her face broke into a smile as she waved me over. Without thinking, I waved back. Her smile was relaxed, but it held a warmth that hadn't been there before. An unspoken awareness made my stomach do a slow flip. "Elias," she said as I approached, "I didn't expect to see you out tonight." I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Just meeting up with Caleb. I didn't know you'd be here." She laughed lightly. "Yeah, just catching up with some old friends. It's been a while since I had a night out." Her eyes held mine for a second longer than necessary, and just like that, the tension was back. That subtle undercurrent that seemed to hum between us, always present, just beneath the surface. I should have walked away, should have said good night and found Caleb, but I didn't. Instead, I pulled up a stool next to her. We talked, we laughed, pretending there was nothing unusual about the situation. Eventually, Caleb arrived and joined us. The three of us sat there, talking about college, old memories, and the silly things we used to do. Even with the lively chatter all around us, my mind kept drifting. And every time Sarah looked my way, I felt it. That shift, that something. Her laughter or a simple glance would trigger a response in me, something I didn't fully understand. It felt like we were both guarding a secret that neither of us dared to speak. Then, at one point, Caleb got up to grab another round, leaving just the two of us at the table. I hadn't planned on saying anything, but the words slipped out before I could stop them. "So, Sarah, how have you really been?" She paused. Her smile faded slightly, and for a moment I saw something raw and vulnerable in her eyes. "I'm okay," she said quietly. "Just been feeling a little lonely lately." Her honesty caught me off guard. It was as if she had peeled back another layer, revealing a person I hadn't expected, someone who was so much more than just Caleb's mother. I nodded slowly. "I get that. It's not always easy." She returned the nod, and we sat in silence for a few moments. It wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, in a strange way. I wanted to say something more, something to comfort her, to ease the burden she was carrying, but the words wouldn't come. So I just looked at her, wondering if she truly meant it, or if perhaps she was hinting at something deeper. Caleb returned with our drinks, and the moment passed. But something inside me had shifted again. That night, my perception of Sarah changed for good. She no longer felt like just a friend's parent. There was a different kind of light around her now, a dangerous kind. Later, when we all decided to head home, I walked Caleb to his car, but my thoughts were stuck on that brief conversation with her. What did she really mean by lonely? Was she just bored, or was she gently asking for something more? As soon as I got home, I collapsed onto my sofa and replayed the entire evening in my mind. That dinner, that confession at the bar, that look in her eyes. It was then that I realized this wasn't just some random sequence of events. There was something else developing between us, something unspoken and powerful. And whether I wanted to admit it or not, I was being drawn into it. The scariest part? I wasn't sure I wanted to resist anymore. The following days felt heavy with unspoken thoughts. I couldn't stop thinking about the bar and the way Sarah had opened up to me. Her quiet admission of loneliness, the way her gaze had lingered on mine as if searching for something. It all hung in the air between us. I couldn't shake the feeling, no matter how hard I tried. I kept telling myself it meant nothing, that it was just a fleeting moment of vulnerability. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Caleb and I had always been close. He was my best friend. But lately, even when we were hanging out, I found my mind wandering. Back to her. Back to Sarah. I hated that about myself. I hated the thoughts that refused to leave me alone. Her smile, the way she carried herself. She felt different to me now. That Saturday, I decided I needed to clear my head. I called Caleb and suggested we go to the park and shoot some hoops, just like we used to. Maybe if I could exhaust my body, I could quiet my mind. When I got to the court, Caleb was already there, practicing his layups. He looked up and grinned when he saw me. "About time. You're late," he teased, tossing me the ball. I forced a smile and mumbled something about being held up. We played hard for the next hour, joking, talking trash, trying to one-up each other, but my head wasn't in the game. My thoughts were somewhere else entirely, somewhere warm, soft, and deeply perplexing. After a while, we took a break, sitting on the edge of the court. Out of the blue, Caleb asked, "You think my mom's doing okay?" He wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked over at me. The question threw me. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "She's just been distant lately," he said, his eyes fixed on the pavement. "Not her usual self. I don't know if she's stressed or what, but something feels off. I think she's going through something." That hit me harder than I expected. I had always seen Sarah as this steady, controlled presence, never rattled or unsure. But maybe I had been wrong. "I don't know," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Have you talked to her about it?" He shook his head. "Not really. Every time I try, she just brushes it off. I don't want to push her, but I can tell she's not okay." I wasn't sure what to say. Part of me wanted to come clean, to tell him about the shift I had felt, the changes I had seen in both her and myself. But I couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "Maybe she just needs some space," I offered, trying to sound nonchalant. "Yeah," he muttered. "Maybe." But I could hear the doubt in his voice. He wasn't buying it. We finished our game and headed back to his place. The whole time, my gut was in a knot, as if I were walking toward something I couldn't stop. We walked through the front door, and there she was. Sarah was sitting on the sofa, flipping through a magazine. She looked up when we came in, a pleasant smile on her face, as if everything were perfectly normal. "Hey, you two," she said warmly, but I could see it. The fatigue in her eyes, the slight rigidity in her posture. I realized she was playing a part. "Hey, Mum," Caleb said, plopping down on the couch next to her. "You doing all right?" Sarah paused for a fraction of a second before nodding. "Yeah, just been one of those long weeks." I could tell she was deflecting, treating it as nothing. I didn't press the issue, mainly because I had no idea how. My heart was pounding louder than I wanted to admit. So I escaped to the kitchen, telling them I was getting a glass of water. I needed a moment to breathe, to get away from the weight that was hanging in the room. But as I reached for a glass, I heard footsteps behind me. Sarah was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. "Elias," she said quietly, her voice calm but direct. "Can we talk for a minute?" I turned around, caught off guard. Yeah, sure. What's up?" She stepped into the kitchen and gently closed the door behind her. The space between us shrank, and I felt my chest tighten as she moved closer. I wanted to thank you for the other night," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "It meant a lot to me." I swallowed hard, her words hitting me with more force than I anticipated. "Of course," I managed to say. "You know I'm here if you ever need someone to talk to." She nodded slowly, and for a moment neither of us spoke. We stood in a dense, heavy silence that buzzed with everything we weren't saying. Then, almost as if to change the subject, she said, "Caleb's a good kid. You know, he's had his share of struggles, but he has such a good heart." I nodded again, unsure where this was going. But her gaze stayed on me for an extra beat. The same spark I had felt before was back. It hummed between us like a wire stretched too tight. "Yeah," I said softly. "He really does." She smiled, but there was something else in that smile, something I couldn't quite decipher. I wondered if she was thinking the same thing I was, and for a fleeting second I considered asking her. I almost asked what was happening between us, but I didn't. I just stood there, trapped in the silence with her, wondering where we were supposed to go from here. Finally, she broke the moment with a quiet, "Thanks again, Elias." "Anytime," I replied, but a part of me knew I wasn't saying it in the same way anymore. A week had passed since that conversation in the kitchen. It hadn't been dramatic or loud, but it had stayed with me. Every time I saw Sarah after that, the air felt different, charged with an unspoken electricity. I couldn't tell if she felt it too, or if I was just projecting my own feelings. Either way, the dynamic between us had shifted, and I couldn't ignore it. Caleb and I hung out as usual. He laughed, he joked, he did his best to keep things light, but it didn't help. Every time Sarah walked into the room, my eyes would follow her. I noticed the little things, like the way she tilted her head when she was listening intently, the way her eyes would meet mine for just a second longer than necessary. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. I felt it. Then came Saturday. Caleb had plans with his friends, so I found myself at their place, waiting for him to get ready. It wasn't what I had planned, but I didn't mind. The truth was, I needed the quiet. I needed space to try and make sense of what was happening in my head and in my gut. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when I heard her voice from the hallway. "Elias?" I looked up, startled, to see her standing there. Her expression was unreadable. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, but my heart was already picking up its pace. She walked into the room, hesitated for a moment, and then asked, "Can we talk?" That simple question made my stomach clench. "Yeah, of course," I said, setting my phone aside. She came over and sat on the couch next to me. We weren't touching, but the space between us felt infinitesimally small. The air felt heavier. The room felt smaller. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversations lately," she began, her voice soft and careful. "And I feel like I owe you an apology." I stared at her, caught completely off guard. This was not where I expected this conversation to go. "I know I've been a bit intense," she explained, saying she'd been dealing with some personal things and didn't mean to unload them on me. I blinked, trying to read her face. "I mean, it's fine," I finally said. "You don't have to apologize for anything." She gave me a warm smile at that, but something in her eyes told me she wasn't entirely convinced. There was more she wasn't saying. "I appreciate that," she replied, "but I think I might have crossed a line with you." My heart skipped a beat. This was the moment I had been both dreading and, if I was being honest with myself, secretly hoping for. I had no idea where it would lead, but I couldn't stop myself from hearing her out. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice softening, becoming more cautious. Sarah took a deep breath and looked down at her hands, nervously fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. "I think you know," she said gently. "There's been something between us, and I can't keep pretending it isn't there." I froze. Her words hit me right in the chest, harder than I had expected. Of course, I had felt it, but hearing her say it out loud made it real, tangible, and terrifying. "I'm not trying to make things awkward, Elias," she continued, her voice just above a whisper. I don't know how to handle this, but I can't keep acting like nothing is happening." I looked at her, my mind racing in a dozen different directions. Every rational part of me was screaming that this was wrong, that I shouldn't be here, in this situation. And yet, there I was. "I don't want it to be weird either," I said, my voice barely steady. "But I don't really know what you want me to say." She met my gaze then, her eyes direct and unwavering. We sat in silence for a long moment. The stillness was thick, heavy with everything we couldn't say out loud. Then she reached out. Her hand brushed against mine, a touch so light it was barely there, but it sent an electric jolt through me. My breath caught in my throat, and for a few seconds I couldn't move. "This isn't just some crush, Elias," she whispered, her eyes locked on mine. "I don't know what this is, but I can't ignore it anymore, and I don't want to." A tidal wave of emotions washed over me all at once. Guilt, curiosity, desire, fear. I knew the risks. I knew what could happen if anyone ever found out, but the connection between us felt too strong to deny, and a part of me didn't want it to stop. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "I mean, with everything, this is—" She nodded, her fingers curling around mine, her grip firm and certain. "I'm sure." And with that one sentence, the invisible line we had been so carefully dancing around vanished completely. We didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to say. But the atmosphere had changed. We had both felt the shift, the immense weight of what we had just acknowledged. Everything was different after that. It's been a year since that afternoon on the couch. A year of us choosing to keep a secret. A year of balancing the routines of everyday life with the quiet, stolen moments we carved out for ourselves. In some ways, it feels like we've lived an entire lifetime in those brief pockets of time. We didn't talk much about the us of it all. What had started that day she opened the door in a tear-streaked panic had not faded. It had simply woven itself into the fabric of our lives. It felt strangely natural, but it was also fragile, something we both guarded fiercely. We agreed on one thing from the very beginning. Our happiness mattered, and that happiness was built on a foundation of trust, a kind of trust that allowed us to be completely open with each other while keeping it all hidden from the outside world. We created our own little bubble, our own miniature version of something real. But the guilt never fully disappeared. Every time I saw Caleb, a small, sharp pang would hit the back of my mind. Not because I thought he deserved to know, but because carrying a secret of this magnitude always leaves a mark. Still, I never once second-guessed the choice we made. We both made it, and no matter how complicated or messy things got, being with her always felt right. Sarah and I saw each other whenever we could, which wasn't often. We never pushed the boundaries. We kept everything discreet, quiet, and out of sight. The hardest part was the pretense. Caleb would be home, laughing and talking, completely oblivious. We'd keep our distance, our hands to ourselves, acting as if we were nothing more than his mom and his best friend. But those small moments, the quick, meaningful glance across the room, the subtle smile that was only for me, the fleeting brush of our hands when no one was looking, they became our language. They were what held us together. When we were alone in her house, we'd sometimes talk about what might happen if the truth ever came out. We never had a concrete plan, just vague what-ifs and half-formed ideas. But we didn't dwell on it for long. We stayed in the present, in the quiet, in between spaces where we didn't have to justify ourselves to anyone, where we could just be. It was a quiet Saturday evening, almost exactly a year after our relationship began. I was back at Sarah's house sitting on the couch, the same spot where it had all started. The house was peaceful. Caleb was out with his friends, so we had the place to ourselves again. Everything felt normal now, comfortable in a way that had once been so foreign. We had learned how to exist like this, quiet, careful, and connected. We didn't need to constantly talk about our feelings anymore. The relationship had settled into something steady. something real. It was unconventional, to say the least, but it had become something I couldn't imagine giving up. Sarah sat next to me, looking as beautiful as she always did. But there was a softness to her now, an ease in her posture, a serenity in her expression. It had taken time, but we had learned to carry the weight of what we had. We had grown into our secret. I had found a strange peace in it. I had learned how to make it feel like home. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" she asked quietly, her voice a warm, low murmur that broke the silence. I smiled and leaned my head back against the cushions. "All the time," I admitted. "Honestly, I still can't believe we've made it this long without everything falling apart." I looked over at her, my initial disbelief having transformed into something that felt a lot like gratitude. "It doesn't feel like a year," she said with a soft laugh, resting her head on my shoulder. "It doesn't, does it?" she murmured. "But at the same time, it feels like this has always been our reality, like this was always meant to happen." I nodded slowly, my hand finding hers. "Yeah, it's weird," I said. "But it's the good kind of weird. I never expected my life to look like this, but now that I'm here, I wouldn't change a thing." She tilted her head up, meeting my gaze with that same look that always seemed to make the world stand still. "Me neither," she replied softly. "Considering the circumstances, I think we've done pretty well. I'm glad we kept it between us." Her voice was firm, confident. "It's ours. It's just for us." And she was right. That was the most important part. It wasn't about anyone else. This was something we had built together, quietly and carefully. "I'm happy," I said softly, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "We're happy. That's what matters." We didn't say much after that. We didn't need to. We just sat there, side by side, wrapped in a silence that didn't need to be filled. The only sound was the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall. A year had passed, a whole year of hiding in plain sight. We had somehow made it work. We had kept the secret. We had protected what we had. And through it all, we had held on to the one thing that mattered most: each other. As the evening wore on and the sky outside deepened to a dark blue, one thought crystallized in my mind. This was how I wanted things to be. It wasn't perfect. It was messy and strange and difficult, but it was ours, and for now that was more than enough.